Good afternoon. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Nick Files. I'm your host, Nick Muley. Not sure what was going on in the beginning there. I must have accidentally clicked the countdown by mistake. Today is going to be a relatively, actually, I'm sorry, we are all on here. Okay, we all are here. Okay, awesome. All right. Wasn't sure what he meant by that at first. Now I understand. Anyways, today we got quite a good episode for you tonight, today. We're going to be taking a break from doing I guess you can kind of call it the haunted online tour of Athens, Ohio, because we got a very important event that's coming up this weekend. And this is, I guess you can kind of say, kind of promoting for, not necessarily for the event, but at the location of where it's going to be. And in this case, although we're not focusing on Athens, Ohio, this location I'll be presenting for today is still located in the state of Ohio, but in a different area. And that is, we're going to be focusing on the Ohio State Reformatory, or sometimes simply known as Mansfield Reformatory. I'm sure a lot of you guys are very familiar with that location because it's been the site of several movies and music videos and several of the paranormal television shows that have been there, including in the case with films, the most notorious of them all, undoubtedly, is Shawshank Redemption. Now, obviously, that story is not really a true story, but what we're going to be looking at today, obviously, is the real history behind OSR. And I have to tell you guys, I think, in my opinion, if you compare Shawshank Redemption and the true history of Ohio State Reformatory, I think the real history is far more darker than what you see in the movie. Just before we get started, I just want to say some quick shout outs for everyone who just joined. Hello, Nigel. Good to see you. Yes, I know, like I said, I know we're all here. That's awesome, Eric. Good afternoon, Laura. Good to see you. Hello, Natalie. Thanks for tuning in. Good afternoon, Rita. Lauren, you made it. Great to see you. All right. So let's get right to it, shall we? So give me 1 second here. Let me get through this fun technique. And I just realized I forgot to share out on one of the other network pages, because one of the other network pages I'm a part of, I'm actually unable to really share this whole thing. I'm really unable to broadcast it on the network itself. I always have to share it on the link every single time. So just bear with me for just a moment while I'm getting all this stuff ready. Hey, Kelly, good to see you. Okay, so let's get started with, tell you what, let's take care of the presentation first, and then I'll post the link onto the It's Haunted Network page. Damn, you gotta love technology sometimes. Okay, got that taken care of. And it's okay. You know what? I could actually probably do this while I'm doing the show, because I don't want to keep myself. I don't want to keep myself waiting. I mean, I don't want to keep myself on this. All right. So as already mentioned, obviously for today's episode, we'll be focusing on the Ohio State Reformatory, which is a location that I myself will be heading out to this weekend for ParasiteCon. My friend Tom McNicholas and I, we've been going now. This will be my 5th time at least going to OSR, and we've been going to the ParasiteCon out in Mansfield pretty much since they started back in 2019. So we've been going just about almost every year, with the exception of 2020 because of COVID-19. But I'll tell you guys right now, going to OSR is always, I'll say, well, actually, let me put it this way. Going to OSR the first time was an unusual experience, because first off, it was not, I mean, it wasn't the first, type of haunted prison I've ever gone to, but it was the first one that really caught me off guard, because the one thing you'll notice very quickly is just how huge this place is. As you can clearly see, it has like It has a castle-like structure as it was built with as a Gothic revival structure. And in my opinion, even without the ghost stories involved, if you're actually there in person, this prison undoubtedly is literally one of the scariest looking buildings I've ever seen. Just see how huge, how massive, how intimidating this place looks. The first time I saw it, I pretty much got the understanding why inmates were terrified of this place when they were heading up to this place in the prison buses. Like just the amount of sheer terror that must have gone through them. And it's sad we just don't have these type of prisons anymore. I mean, we still do. We still have a few of them, but it's sad they just don't build prisons like this anymore because you a place like OSR or some other prisons like Joliet Correctional Center here in Illinois, Eastern State Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, Moundsville Penitentiary in West Virginia. Um, all these different historic prisons that we have in those days when these prisons were built, they were designed to look almost very scary looking, sending you that message, basically saying that cautionary message of what would happen to people if they broke the law. And a place like this would have sent a clear message saying, you broke the law, this is where you're going to end up. So it's either way, it's an amazing building regardless. So let's get started with the history of this place. And the history involving OSR goes a lot more further back than how some people will tell the story. So I actually uncovered a little bit of more earlier history than what I have previously said about the prison. Excuse me. So the history of the Ohio State Reformatory began in 1860. The field where the reformatory would be built was used as a training camp for Civil War soldiers. Soldiers came here to drill in preparation for the war. And this is also one of the very few photographs I was actually able to find of this training camp. And considering this was probably shot in 1861, even just finding one photo was incredible. I couldn't believe I actually found this picture long before even the reformatory was ever built. The camp at the time, though, was named Camp Mordecai Bartley, I believe, in honor of the Mansfield man who served as the Ohio governor in the 1840s. In 1867, Mansfield was promoted as a candidate for the placement of the new Intermediate Penitentiary, which was the original name before it was changed to Ohio State Reformatory. In 1884, the Ohio State legislature approved the creation of a prison to serve as an intermediate step and midpoint between the Boys Industrial School in Lancaster and the Ohio Penitentiary in Columbus. The Boys Industrial School was a reform meant for boys between the ages of 8 and 18, while the state penitentiary housed young first offenders. So clearly, from what I'm hearing about what the Boys Industrial School, you could pretty much say this was kind of like an early version of what's kind of an early version of our modern day juvenile facilities. So it almost sounded like this was like a juvenile hall or a juvenile detention center, considering it was like for all these young boys between 8 and 18. So it's interesting that they were kind of working on creating such an institution for kids of those certain ages. Though it had been known as the Intermediate Penitentiary for years, the name changed several years before the prison finally opened. The city of Mansfield was selected and land was purchased. The city raised $10,000 to purchase 30 acres of land for the prison, and the state acquired 150 acres of adjoining land for $20,000. The cost of the facility was about, if I'm saying this correctly, $1,326,769. The Intermediate Ohio State Reformatory was intended as just that. Yeah, exactly. As a halfway point between the Boys Industrial School in Lancaster and the state Okay, it says okay. It's just showing some of that same information again. Never mind. Just I'm just gonna skip that one. A Gothic prison of hope was born in Mansfield. The foundation of the reformatory was, begun on August 27, 1886. The cornerstone of this reform fortress was laid on November 4th, with pomp, including Masonic ceremonies and a brief speech by Ohio's then governor, J.B. Foraker. Excuse me. The contractor for almost all of the week was Hancock and Dow. The local community and its political leaders enthusiastically campaigned for the building of the reformatory, mainly because of the boost it provided for the local employment rate and economy. And this is actually how the prison was first built. You can clearly see this was a photo of it taken here in the 1890s, and you could see compared to how it looks like today, as big as it was, it's not as big as it's not as big obviously as compared to today. Because if you notice, somewhat on the edges of the photograph, it doesn't have the east and west wings along with the entire prison wall behind it. So the actual prison, when it was built from the very start, was a lot smaller before they started building everything else around it. Give me 1 second here, guys. I'm just about to send it to the It's Haunted Network page, so hang on 1 second. And okay. The Ohio State Reformatory was a massive project spanning more than 14 years in construction alone. The year 1891 was when the penitentiary became the Ohio State Reformatory. The final exterior construction work was not completed until September 22nd, 1900. It remained under construction until 1910 due to funding problems, which caused construction delays. The new Ohio State Reformatory broke a world record, 6 blocks, an amazing 6 levels high. You have to remember, as long as some of these prisons really took to really be put together, it's interesting. I actually did some research of figuring out exactly who was building this prison. Other than what you see here, but it's interesting to know that it didn't sound like that they were kind of relying on using inmate labor, which was typical of such prisons during the 19th century to be built by the inmates themselves. Not saying at all that maybe they never used them, but I noticed that there is no particular mention about inmate labor that was used in the construction of the prison. Very quickly, I just want to go on to the comments, so give me just 1 second here. All right, so who else we got here? Kelly, I'm doing great. Good to have you here. Nigel, thank you very much. You do have a paranormal gift. That's really interesting, Kelly. Kelly, I promise you, this is a place that doesn't disappoint. Hey, Christine, good to see you. Okay, so going right back. So the Ohio State Reformatory was designed by Cleveland architect Levi Schofield, who, if you guys don't remember, I actually did make a mention about him previously on the show at a different location, actually on one of the locations in Athens, Ohio, which he is the same architect who built the Athens Mental Health Center, or AKA the Ridges. Schofield designed the striking limestone building to be an uplifting, inspiring, and intimidating structure. To create it, he used a mix of 3 distinct styles, including Queen Anne, Richardsonian, Romanesque, and Victorian Gothic. The reasoning behind this blend of styles, according to Schofield, was to help inmates be reborn into their spiritual selves. They keep saying the same thing here. The reformatory was originally called the Intermediate Penitentiary since it accepted inmates who were too old for juvenile corrections, but had committed offenses more minor than that those that sent others to the Ohio State Penitentiary, as well as first-time offenders who were too violent for industrial schools who could serve their time. OSR was to rehabilitate young male first-time offenders through hard work and education. A self-sufficient institution with its own power plant and working farm, the reformatory produced goods in its workshops for other state institutions and provided opportunities for inmates to learn trades. The architecture was supposed to encourage inmates back to a rebirth of their spiritual lives, away from their sinful lifestyle and toward repentance. So, again, the way how it seemed like how everything was supposed to work at this particular institution was if they sent a lot of these kids to OSR, their hope in their eyes was not only to try to correct them and reform them from what they were doing, these crimes that they've been committing, but it was, you can kind of say it was almost kind of like, as I can kind of put it, at least the way I can understand, almost like that of kind of like a scared straight program in some way. It's like their hope at that time was to send these kids to a rather scary looking prison like this one and kind of have them somewhat intermingle with them with hardcore adult convicts and all this hard work and labor, in the hopes that being, as well as the education, in the hopes that being in these inmates' presence or being in a place like this, that they would eventually be deterred from continuing, their violent or criminal lifestyles. Excuse me. Despite the fact that the construction took 14 years to be complete, on September 15th, 1896, after 10 years of construction, the reformatory opened its doors to its first 150 offenders, while many aspects of the planned construction were uncompleted. For security reasons, the exact schedule of events was not advertised, but still there were large crowds present. These prisoners were brought by train from Columbus and put immediately to work on the prison sewer system and the 25-foot stone walls surrounding the complex. Schnitzer was present with a silver double ink. Schnitzer was presented with a silver double inkwell by the governor of the state in a lavish ceremony to thank him for his services. They were sited in the west wing of cells. Now, as you can see in this photo, I don't know exactly what year this picture was taken, but now I think this is starting to be, hopefully by now you guys can see it's starting to become a lot more familiar due to its size, because you can see now that the, if I'm thinking correctly, the west and east wings have now been built. So the goal of the institution was truly to reform and rehabilitate its inmates, who received three things during their time at OSR: religion, education, and a trade. This was one of the very few photos I was able to find of one of the actual classes that took place in OSR. Again, another rare photograph indeed. And it's interesting when you look at a photo like this, you see all these people, all these students, if you will. Once again, they look like young boys and men, probably like, from what I remember hearing, was when they started bringing these other kids, and eventually they started bringing older kids or young adults, if you will. From what I can remember, they really, for the first couple of years, although they started between ages 8 to 18, they eventually started bringing people into their 20s. I guess they were really housing anybody who was under the age of 30. So it didn't take long before it became a place, a prison that was full of hundreds of young men in their mid to late teens and 20s. Inmates were admitted for 18 months, and if they showed progress, they could be released after that time. If not, they received another 18 months. The model was successful, and OSR had a high successful rate and a low recidivism. I can't even say that word, damn it. Uh, Low rates. Inmates were taught basic traits for release and reintegration into society. However, as prison populations swelled in the 20th century, the reformatory was forced to accept inmates convicted of more serious and violent crimes. The Ohio State Reformatory was in control of a board of managers who were intended to be nonpartisan, with no more than 3 members to belong to the same political party. And these are the different managers. Here you got, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, here on top, I believe, is the Republicans, and then here on the bottom, I believe, are the Democrats. Not to get political, it's just that it was actually the prison was actually in control of the reformatory. But the first superintendent of the Ohio State Reformatory was W.D. Patterson. However, his term as superintendent was very short at the reformatory, and he resigned in February of 1897, less than 6 months after the reformatory received prisoners. Although Patterson resigned, the local news of the day claimed that it was not strictly voluntary and was politically motivated, despite the intention and legal requirement that the reformatory be nonpartisan. The Shield and Banner claimed that Patterson had been deposed by the board of managers in favor of the deputy superintendent W.E. Sefton, who was allegedly more to the liking of the governor at the time, as he was a Republican while Patterson was a Democrat. Excuse me. Other reasons given for the preference of Sefton over Patterson included age, given that Patterson was more than 70 at the time, and Sefton was in the prime of his life and a courteous gentleman. The other staff of the reformatory listed when the first prisoners arrived were a chaplain, a secretary, a farm manager, and 25 guards. Not necessarily there's 25 of them. There's a lot more to it, but I couldn't find an actual photo of the 25 guards themselves. The farm manager was unsurprisingly responsible for the cultivation of the reformatory farm. The architect was responsible for the work on the reformatory that was as yet uncompleted and would not be completed for another 4 years, a year beyond the estimate given when the reformatory opened due to the delays in the iron and steelwork. The chaplain was responsible for holding chapel services and was also responsible for reading all of the letters written by the prisoners. Now, if you go to this particular picture right here of the chapel, for those of you that haven't been to OSR yet, as someone who's gone now about 5 times, soon to be 6 this upcoming weekend. The chapel, of course, still exists today. Of course, it's not as in good condition as it originally was when it was first built. But you see right here that there's a balcony where inmates would also sit. Unfortunately, the balcony doesn't exist anymore. That was, I don't know exactly when that was taken down, but I think due to its age, they had to remove it. So unfortunately, that's no longer there when you go there today. Now, the central guard room is located in the center of the reformatory on the 2nd floor and was integral to the prison's operation. Inmates would have entered through this room during the processing at the beginning of their sentence and would also leave the reformatory through the space. This space had several purposes throughout the prison's operation as well, including being used for visitation and the control center for guards. Now, in the late 1930s, a riot broke out in the East Cell Block. The guards condemned 120 rioters to share 12 solitary confinement cells for 1 week without food or water. This punishment drove many to the brink of madness and death. OSR quickly became the domain of the very worst criminals in the American penal system. It became and it didn't take long, but it became a maximum security facility in 1946, housing all types of offenders. So this is kind of like where the scare factor started coming in for inmates who were being sent to OSR. That's, this is when inmates actually started getting really scared when they heard that they were going to be sent to OSR. Now, unfortunately, one of the most tragic events to have occurred in association with OSR was a murder that never even occurred within the walls of OSR itself. It actually occurred in the walls it actually occurred outside the walls of OSR. Even though this didn't occur in the reformatory, it still has there's still very much a connection to this brutal murder, which I'm going to get to right now. But in July 1948, when the reformatory's farm boss, his wife and daughter were kidnapped and shot to death by two parolees bent on revenge. A 6-state manhunt for the so-called Mad Dog Killers ended in a shootout that left Robert Daniels of Columbus in custody and his partner, James West, dead, which surprisingly, despite such a horrific event, I couldn't find any photos of either one of these two men, not even any mugshots, which I was really surprised by. Apparently, as what Daniels had said, he at one point said, "I'll get the chair," Daniels told police as he signed the confession. And on January 3rd, 1949, he did. So so he was executed here at OSR. Now, from 1935 until 1959, Arthur Lewis Glack was the superintendent. Initially a political appointment following Glack's work on the Martin Davey campaign, by all accounts, Glack was respected by professionals and inmates alike. He implemented many reforms, such as piped-in radio music in the cell blocks. However, now, some of you guys have probably heard the story before who are familiar with OSR, but for those who don't, tragedy struck for both Glack and his wife, Helen Bauer Glack. This is the only photo I was able to find of both of them together, but I did manage to find separate photos of them. I just figured it was actually a good way to kind of put all three of them together, which you'll see in just a moment, seeing his wife. But in November 1950, Helen was removing a jewelry box from a closet shelf in the family quarters, and she dislodged a pistol from its hiding place. When it hit the floor, the gun went off, inflicting a fatal wound into her chest. She died of pneumonia 3 days following the accident. I wish I could say that would be the end, but unfortunately, things do get a lot more worse in this case now for Arthur. Within the decade, even more tragedy occurred when Glack worked hard at work in his office, suffered a heart attack, and died on February 10th, 1959. And if you guys don't know, again, not necessarily drawing a connection between this tragic event, especially for Arthur, and also like the movie Shawshank Redemption. But for those that have seen the Shawshank Redemption, when they shot it at OSR, one of the rooms they shot obviously was the scenes where when they shot at the warden's office. This was the same warden's office in which Arthur suffered his heart attack and died in, believe it or not. It's kind of ironic how in the movie, I already forgot his name, the actor who plays the warden in Shawshank Redemption, but it's kind of ironic how in that near the end of the film, he commits suicide, kills himself in the warden's in his office. But in reality, a true warden actually did die. The only difference was it was not a suicide; it was a heart attack that occurred, and that was Bob Gunton. That's who it was. I was looking it up while I was trying to while I was explaining. So during its 94 years as a working prison, 150,000 inmates passed through the gates of the Ohio State Reformatory. Many, unfortunately, died of diseases like influenza and tuberculosis, but some died of less natural causes. Some went mad, others hung themselves, and at least one inmate lit himself on fire. From the violence that is all too common inside any prison and was far from unknown in this one. And the worst of it occurred well away from the main cell block, with the rows of cages stacked tier on tier and inmates one or two to a cell. There were too many eyes, too many witnesses here. No, the worst of it was reserved for a far lonelier place deep beneath the prison ground. A place called local control, or solitary by some. Solitary by some, known by everyone else as the hole, which I wasn't able to find, again, an early photo of it. Near total isolation can crack all but the toughest of cons, but none was so alone that there wasn't room for death. It embodied suffering for 100 years. 20 pitch black basement cells on the sunniest day. Inmates forced down on roach-infested floors. Starved with small portions of bread and water served every 3 days. Once 2 men left too long in a single tomb-like cell, only one walked out, leaving his cellmate's body behind, stuffed beneath a bunk. Just outside the reformatory stands 215 numbered graves, a vivid testament to the harsh reality of prison life. Over 200 people died at the OSR, including 2 guards who were killed during escape attempts. All right, so before we continue on with the slides, I do have a video I'm going to present. This I borrowed from YouTube. And what I'm actually going to play, let me see how long this video in particular is. It is, okay, so it's about a 20-minute video, but it features interviews of different inmates and staff members who actually worked at the facility during its operating days. Just before we do that, let me just go back to the comments very quickly, because again, I'm sure there's been a lot going on. Now let's see what else. Who do we have that have joined in? Hey Josh, good to see you. Yeah, I'm sure they did use prison labor. You're probably correct on that. Pickle Tom's in the house. Who else we got? Hello Rachel, good to see you. What's going on, Penny? Feel bad for the lower level offenders when they started letting in more danger. Yeah, I can't even imagine. I'd feel bad for them too, because you could probably, I'm sure they probably came to that realization of what they were doing was not acceptable and not legal. And when they started letting in these dangerous offenders in, it was, you bring those hardened criminals in, that's not a good thing. Doesn't really, not only scares them even more, but furthermore, that might, you mix them in knowing of how violent some of these dangerous offenders, these more dangerous offenders could be. Some of these inmates probably never got out and managed to go home. It is truly a terrible way to go. No, Diana, I was trying to remember who it wasn't Tom Hanks. That was Bob Gunton who played the warden in Shawshank. Good to see you though. Yes, it definitely a horrific time for low-level offenders. So anyways, going back to the screen now, check out the video of different inmates, former inmates, and staff members who worked at the facility who described their time when OSR was in operation. Hopefully you guys can hear.
It was always loud. Everything was loud all the time.
Yeah.
It was always loud. Everything was loud all the time. When it got quiet, kind of make the hair on the back of your neck stand up because something was getting ready to happen.
Well, this is a big day for me. As we look around at this place, it certainly looks different than it did.
They started building this back in 1886. Levi Schofield was the architect the state hired. He was told to make something that was menacing yet spiritual. And so they studied plans of castles and cathedrals in Europe, especially Germany. And that's why we have the Romanovsk and Goth feel around here.
My first venture in here, which was really probably about 1980, actually, 1979 and 80, when I was chief of the Bureau of Classification. And back at that time, we were classifying reformatory inmates and penitentiary inmates. And Lebanon and OSR at Mansfield here were the two reformatory places. And typically it was for first offenders under the age of 30, usually 18 to 24, 25 years old. And it was a rough housing place.
The first time I walked in here, it was as a volunteer when I was bringing those youngsters in for the Scared Straight program. I was amazed at the roar that you could hear. In the area that we're in right now, there was always activity on the left and the east, or the east and the west block side, and it was like a low rumble. And then the doors slamming and the loud noises. I was pretty intimidated.
When I started here, they brought us in the first day, and we had to come in and go through and go across the yard because quartermaster was across the compound. First thing I remember was the door slamming behind me and all the noise. It was very loud.
You need to watch your back here at all times. It was a tough place. You never knew when you came out of that cell what was going to happen. I carried a razor blade with me all the time. I never had to use it for. I needed it and not had it. It might have been a different story.
It was very different. You knew that you were in prison back then. When that door shut behind you and you heard the noise, and just the inmates are usually, what's going on in prison is usually a direct reflection of what's going on in society.
That's a scene from Shawshank.
And they didn't really know how to respond to women back then. They were rather quiet, protective. Some of them were very, very protective. Back then, when I started, very little training. They had just opened the academy. I went through some training, and then you were pretty much on your own. And the inmates back then did a lot of work that staff do today in the prisons. Then they would start feeding. And I was in the gym, and I would be alone, and I had to be there with 500 inmates until the officers arrived. Think about doing that now. I mean, that's insane.
We weren't allowed to walk anywhere unless we had a person with us. another female. We weren't allowed to be in our area down there unless there was a man present. That happened that lasted for a long time. I don't even remember when we were allowed to actually walk by ourselves.
I'm sitting at my desk doing some paperwork, and it's really quiet. It's very first thing in the morning, probably wasn't even 7 o'clock yet. I hear this rattle on the steps, and where my office was located, you could look out these big windows and kind of look around, peer around the corner, and you could see if somebody wasn't out on that landing waiting to come in the door, because the door would have been locked. And I looked out there and looked around. I didn't see anything, so I went back. So I went back to work, and it wasn't 5 minutes later. I heard that noise again. I pulled away the curtains, and I peered around the corner. But this time I looked up, and on the tier of steps above me were 2 inmates, and they had a homemade rope and grappling hook, and they were trying to throw a rope from that level onto the wall, the East Block wall, because that's how we were really close. And on that wall, there was a set of handrails. I think they were trying to throw their grappling hook onto the wall and tie it off onto the rails, and then maybe climb across and escape. Well, I freaked out, and I'm kind of running around the room thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? What should I do? And one of the inmates heard me, and he goes, what's up? And Mr. Billigan and I go, I think there's a couple of inmates outside trying to escape. And what should I do? And he says, well, dial 911. I don't remember the number, but that's what he told me to do. So I went over to the phone and I dialed the number, and I picked the lady on the other end of the phone, answered it. I think it was a lady. And she said, what's your emergency? And I said, I think there's 2 inmates trying to escape right above me. What should I do? And she goes, well, where you're at? And I said, I'm over here in the behind the gymnasium. And so I hung up the phone, and it wasn't a minute later. There were gray shirts everywhere. There was nowhere for these guys to run because they would have climbed down the steps. And so as a result of that, I got this big attaboy from the warden, and he wrote a letter and put it in my personnel file, and I was feeling all proud of myself and everything. And eventually I went to the warden because I needed to talk to him. I said, I'm the one that made the call. I'm the one that saw what happened, but the inmates are the ones that told me what to do. And he goes, well, if you want, go ahead and write something up. We'll put it in their unit or their master files. So when they go to the parole board, maybe it'll help them get out. So.
Well, I remember one Sunday when I was coming to work, and I always get my keys in the control center and then go down through the East Block. And when I arrived to get my keys, they said, you can't get your keys today. There's something going on. And so at that time, I was directed to the ID area where I had full view of the yard, and the inmates were protesting, the East Block inmates. There was a schedule change that they were unhappy with. So they were sitting there, and at the time, the lieutenant in charge, he was trying to talk to them to get them to go back into the cell block, and they refused, so they waited. More manpower arrived. And then eventually the tower guards came out. They shot up in the air the guns, and then they bum rushed the inmates, gathered them up. Then the bus arrived, and they shipped them off.
I came here in August of 1969. I came here on an auto theft and a grand larceny charge. I spent 14 months here, 3 different cells. I was released in September of 1970. And I never came back here for 30 years. I hated this place that bad.
When you look at the cells and you go in and imagine 2 people in there, and then some of them 4 people.
When they brought me over from Stark County, I was in the back of a sheriff's car. I was ankles shackled, had the waist belly band on me, had my handcuffs. The sheriffs that brought me over here never said a word to me the whole ride over here. And I remember sitting on that bunk, wondering what happened. I don't understand.
I'm thinking, what did I get myself into? Here I'm not even a week into work in a prison, and I've seen all this violence and all this activity and all these dangerous things that I felt were going on. And what should I, did I get myself into something I didn't want to do? And almost 30 years later, here I am.
When I started, officers banded together because you had to. the conditions now, everything changes, times change. The inmates have better, they feel safer now. You know, there's cameras everywhere. Everybody's watching, making sure everything's going the way it should. When I started, it was actually corrections. The rehabilitation started right after I started. So that's when the things started happening better for the inmate as far as, because like when I started, they got one phone call a year is all they got. And it was for 5 minutes. They got to call home and tell mom, hi, bye, see ya.
I was a deputy warden at Chillicothe Correctional Institution, had just helped design and open up the training academy that Reggie ended up being the director of the training academy. And I was then sent to Chillicothe as a deputy warden at Chillicothe and oversaw the reception process. And during that time, I ran into a guy that was really a neat guy, a guy that I define the word humility with, Roy Gerard, who was the retired assistant director of the Federal Bureau of Prison. And it happened to be, and I didn't know it at the time, but Roy was actually the mentor of Rick Sider, who was the director at the time. And Rick obviously is my mentor and appointed me as eventually as warden in the end of '86. But during that time,
I'm just going to pause this for just a quick, just got to pause this for a very quick second. If any of you guys are hearing a weird noise that's going on, that's, I apologize for that. It's, my dad's using the hose right now. It's creating this noise, but just so you guys know it, he's almost finished with it. So, it should be ending in just a couple minutes. So sorry if if the noise is annoying you guys. I wasn't expecting he was going to be doing this. So, but anyways, let's continue.
To Roy. And he was presenting to a group of wardens, and it happened to be that the warden at Chillicothe was ill, and I got a chance to go to the meeting, the warden's meeting. It was a big deal for me then, right? And Roy spoke in a very direct way, not very animated, but talked about this thing called unit management.
There we go.
And
That's gone.
talked about taking these large prisons and dividing them into smaller units and putting staff in charge of those smaller units of people to gain control of facilities. And what was remarkable was he designed this as a warden. When he was a warden in a Federal Bureau of Prisons, he said, Gary, he says, I looked out on my prison. He had youthful offenders in the Federal Bureau of Prison, much like was housed here at Mansfield, and said, all I realized was that we were just responding to incidents, one after another. And then he said, it dawned on me that the inmates were really controlling the institution because we were just responding and reacting to what they were doing. And in his own mind, he designed this decentralized, smaller units, putting staff in the units, giving them accountability to manage a population of inmates. And it made all kind of sense to me. So what I did, pretty reckless at the time as a deputy warden, I wrote the director a letter saying, I just listened to Roy Gerard, you were there, and I listened, I digested over the weekend what he said, and I said, I think this is one of the most remarkable processes and management schemes I've heard of, particularly in our large prisons. And I really hope that we follow through with that. Within 2 days, Rick sent me a note back saying, congratulations, you are now in charge of implementing unit management across every prison in Ohio.
Director Moore, he was the one that was leading unit management back then. So, yeah, very, very different. They implemented, they started it, so you could start seeing the change occurring.
So 1986, we made our final effort to implement unit management at this site, the Ohio State Reformatory. The conditions were a little better than this right now. I don't think this would have passed a CIDR inspection. But 1986, so we came here, Roy Gerard with me. We took a look at the facility. We toured the entire facility. We interviewed staff. We interviewed inmates. And I walked into the cell block like this, and I said, my good God, where are we going to put staff? Because an integral part of unit management was placing staff inside units and giving them the authority to manage that population in these blocks. And in other places, we were able to build offices, and we had space to do that with, and or in between units, we built offices so staff were in the proximity of the inmates. I look here, and there is no place to put any offices. The fire codes that we were able to comply with, we would have never complied with had we put offices anywhere. And I looked and I said, my goodness, I said, the only place that we have that we can put our staff are in cells like this, staff in cells. Now, what I think is important to understand is Mansfield OSR was a wild place. A lot of violence, a lot of fights, a lot of different activities. And Mansfield's the last place to implement unit management in the system. So as we were doing this, I'm thinking, how are we going to protect our staff? If we put staff in the units, we've got to put them in cells on ranges. And what happens if an inmate grabs a staff member or worse, and we have a major incident? God forbid what happens to the staff, but our work in the last 3 years of implementing this decentralized management system is in jeopardy everywhere with an incident like this. So after an all-day venture and having Eric Dahlberg, who's the warden, and his entire staff with me all day, we walked through, and I met with Eric in the office up there, and we both decided, well, Mansfield shouldn't be the place that we implement unit management, be the only place. After all, we're going to be building the new Mansfield across the field here where it is. So I said, Eric, I'm going to go report to the director that there's just no place to put staff except in cells, and the risk is just too great. We all agreed. This happened to be on a Friday, by the way. So we're driving back to Columbus, and Roy's with me, and Roy's pretty quiet. He says, no. So what are you actually going to tell the director? And I said, well, I'm going to tell him what we said. This is just, the risk is too great to put staff in offices. If someone gets grabbed, if there's an injury, if staff gets hurt, it jeopardizes unit management everywhere. So I'm going to recommend that we don't implement unit management at the Ohio State Reformatory. He was pretty quiet. So we get to the director's office Friday afternoon, and if you know Rick Sider, if you ever knew him, he didn't have a single thing on his desk. In fact, his phone was in his drawer. So I had a couple documents I wanted to hand him. He looked at them. He didn't put them on his desk at all. He says, so Gary, tell me about OSR. So I said, it's a pretty wild place, Director. I said, there's a lot of fights. There's a lot of incidents going on. I said, it's just that the culture is a tough place to implement any kind of progressive kind of peace. And you know what? Unlike other places, there's no places to put staff. If we're to implement unit management, we'd have to put them in those cells and put them in cells on ranges.
Got frozen there for a second.
And Director, I just can't imagine a staff member being there in an incident. I said, unit management would never be sustained in the system. He says, so let me understand something. And by the way, at that time, I looked to my left and I saw Roy, and his seat was like 6 inches behind mine. I was like out in front. I didn't realize the purpose of that until I realized the director's reaction. He says, Gary says, let me go back to 1984 when you wrote that letter saying, I really wanted to be part of unit management. I'd like to see it go. And I appointed you to head up unit management implementation statewide. He said, is OSR one of our prisons currently? And I said, yes, sir, it is. And he says, didn't I instruct you to implement unit management everywhere in the state of Ohio? Yes, you did. He said, I'll tell you what I want you to do. So I want you to get a hold of the warden tonight, Mr. Dahlberg. And I want all of his staff assembled there tomorrow and greet you when you come in. And I want you to stay there until you formulate a plan to put a decentralized management system called unit management and OSR to reduce violence and to improve the culture of that prison. You can imagine.
It's the chapel.
When I got out of that meeting, Roy kind of snickered a little bit. I get a hold of Eric on the phone. He is livid, but he does have a staff assembled. And on that Saturday, we formulated a plan that included putting great staff, correctional officers, correctional counselors, and case managers in these offices that are really cells. and try to convince staff that these were their offices. But the important thing is, while unit management was such a great strength to our system, helping keep our system safer, helping manage inmates, help put them on a trajectory to be released to the public and other places, it really worked well. It worked better at OSR than any other place. It reduced violence. It calmed the atmosphere as we put staff, including female staff, in cells to manage this population. And it was the truest testament to the value of unit management inserting it in a place like this. And so when I think of OSR, when I think of these cells and the unpainted facility, what I really remember our staff sitting in there, working with inmates, getting them to think about their future and making a difference in their lives.
Wow. That's pretty impressive. Very cool. See, this is my first time seeing this too, so this is really surprising to me. Well, that was amazing. So I just want to get to the comments very quickly because I did. Yes, yeah, it's running water. So again, I'm sorry for the noise, guys. Now, Anthony here, of course, I saw what I know I showed this earlier. Wondering during making this, did this have any spirit activity? Activity. We're actually going to get to that in a little while. So this will kind of answer your question very shortly. So let's get back to the slideshow and continue forward. So in spite of these improvements, we're going to go back, however, to how back to the timeline in chronological order. Let's say going back to the 60s, I believe, showing how much was really going on before all these improvements were made for OSR. So by the early 1960s, however, the reform, you know what I'll probably have to do actually is maybe I'll have to move the slide and put it to a little bit of a later time, the slideshow, in case if I decide I want to show this again. But by the early 1960s, however, the reformatory was getting crowded and overpopulation breeds conflict and disease. The state pulled its financial support from the reform model and began converting OSR into a maximum security facility, a purpose for which it was never intended. At times, guards were even forced to double the occupancy in death row cells, which in at least one instance resulted in an inmate's death. During morning checks, guards noticed a prisoner missing from one of the cells. See, it's showing some of that same info again. Upon inspection, the prisoner's body was found broken and stuffed behind the bunk. That's what I mentioned earlier on the show. Instances like this one forced Ohio State Reformatory to close its doors in 1972. That was when it was originally supposed to close. However, that was not that did not occur as originally intended. Although interestingly enough, a few years later, in 1975, parts of the movie Harry and Walter Go to New York were filmed, in which Harry and Walter spend some time behind bars at the penitentiary when the prison was still in operation. See, there's a popular misconception when it comes to OSR that the movie Shawshank Redemption was the first ever movie shot at OSR. And indeed it was, but it was the first movie shot at OSR after the prison had closed. This was the very first movie to be shot at OSR, regardless of whether it was still in operation or not. So this was the true debut film for OSR. And there actually is, believe it or not, some actual footage of the reformatory during its operating days, which I believe it must have been shot, I think, either in the 20s, 30s, or maybe early 40s. I tried looking for that footage to hopefully add on to the slideshow, but unfortunately that footage is unavailable. However, even though it's not available like on YouTube or at least any other video watching sites, far to my knowledge, if you do go to OSR, they do have the footage that does play repeatedly. I mean, the footage is not really that long. I mean, I think it's only about a minute, 2 minutes of footage. I'm not entirely sure, but it's not very long footage at all, but there is some footage out there, but unfortunately it's just not available online, but you can check it out if you ever have the chance of going to OSR. By the 1980s, the conditions had deteriorated to the point where the inmates sued the state of Ohio. The lawsuit was successful, and construction began on a new modern facility nearby. At around the same time, however, though, in 1989, the facility was used for various prison scenes of a second movie that was made, which was the movie Tango and Cash, which was the only other film that was shot while the prison was still in operation. Now, of course, moving on to the 1990s, the reformatory remained in full operation until December 1990, when it was finally closed via federal court order. It was described variously as brutal, inhumane, and disgraceful, and unfit for human habitation. As the result of a prisoner's class action suit citing overcrowding and inhumane conditions, District Judge Frank G. Batsady of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Ohio ordered the prison closed by the end of December 1986. I'm going to have to switch that around. This order was known as the Boyd Consent Decree. The closing date was delayed for 4 years and moved to 1990 due to delays in constructing the replacement corrections facility, the Mansfield Correctional Institution, which stands to the west of the old prison, which, as you can clearly see, interestingly enough, there's not very many photos of the modern day Mansfield Correctional Institution. You can see it's not very big or as intimidating as the original structure was, but right there, just about, I think, I believe it's about a mile west of the old prison. This is basically where the modern Mansfield Correction. This is basically where the modern Mansfield prison stands today, and is now the place where it takes all the offenders and inmates to. Now, undoubtedly, we cannot forget this. In 1993, the prison was chosen and used to serve as the fictional Shawshank State Penitentiary in Maine for the movie The Shawshank Redemption, directed by Frank Darabont, based on a Stephen King tale from 1982, starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, and released a year later, citing its Gothic style stone and brick buildings. Now, I got some trivia facts for you guys about this film, because again, I'm sure most of you have seen this movie, but there's some hidden Easter eggs about this film that you probably never knew about in association with OSR. The 15-acre reformatory, housing its own power plant and farm, unfortunately was partially torn down shortly after filming was completed, leaving the main administration building in 2 cell blocks. And there are photos. I wasn't able to find them online. I'm actually going to try to take screenshots on my phone when I go this weekend. But that's kind of the sad part. About 2 years after the movie was filmed in 1996, the state of Ohio, if I'm correct, they decided that they were going to tear down the entire facility, which, in spite of its history and protests against being demolished, they were going to demolish it anyway. So if you guys remember, like in the courtyard scenes, unfortunately, the courtyard and a lot of the back buildings doesn't exist anymore because they tore that all down. And just right before they got to the main administration building in 2 cell blocks, that's when everybody came out and prevented them from finishing the demolition. And as a result, the prison is still huge, but that's why if you go today, it's a lot more smaller than what you see in the film. Although, interestingly enough, for those of you who haven't gone to OSR yet, you can take pictures of the back of the building, but you cannot take any pictures beyond the back, because in addition to the Mansfield Correctional Institution, they actually built another jail right behind the old one, which is the Richland Correctional Center, which is a minimum security county jail. I got to admit, the first time we went, you actually did see the inmates sometimes outside, and you kind of are left with the old-fashioned question. You kind of wonder, like, so what are they in for? But it's considering that this was a medium security facility, these were not like your real hardened criminals. You know, you didn't have your murderers, rapists, child molesters, robbers, kidnappers, mass murderers, or serial killers, or anyone like that. These were your typical kind of like non-violent offenders. You know, you had your DUIs, your drug users or sellers, assaults, just simple crimes that a lot of these inmates probably weren't serving very much time. Even vandalism, I think I even heard, was one of them. You know, just I think a lot of first-time offenders. But yeah, they actually built it right behind behind OSR. So as a result, because it's an operating jail, you cannot take pictures past. It's always important to bring that up because they do put, signs up that you cannot take pictures past the windows of the reformatory due to that reason. So you ever go, and if you decide not to do it, you can thank me later. Anyways, in addition to, but to kind of give more detail, when they shot Shawshank at OSR, several of the interior shots of the specialized prison facilities, such as the admittance rooms and the warden's office, were shot in the reformatory. The interior of the boarding room, get this, used by Brooks and Red, was in the administration building. Exterior shots of the boarding house were taken elsewhere. So the halfway house sequence, I think a lot of people really were fooled that it was shot at a separate location, when in reality they just shot it in another part of the prison. And if you go to OSR today and you go to that particular room, the part of the ceiling where Brooks and Red, they said that says Brooks was here, so was Red, it is still inscribed on the top wall of that ceiling. It's still there to this day. It's still there to this day, almost 30 years later. Now, internal scenes in the prison cell blocks were filmed on a sound stage built inside a nearby Shutter Westinghouse electric factory. After the reformatory closed, the Shawshank Redemption used the Central Guard Center to film the cafeteria scenes for the movie. Since Darabont wanted the inmate cells to face each other, almost all the cell block scenes were shot on a purpose-built set house in the Westinghouse factory, except for the scene featuring Elmo Blatch's admission of guilt for the crimes for which Andy was convicted. It was filmed in one of the actual prison's more confined cells. The prison was also used for a large panning scene, and the warden's office for an officer's quarters were used to shoot a sequence set in a civilian apartment. Now, before we continue on, I got another thing I'd like to show you guys. It's been a while since I've actually done this on my show because it's been I used to do this on almost every episode, the first couple episodes when I started, but because of such notoriety, I think it's pretty much appropriate, even though we've all seen it. I think it's appropriate that I show you guys the trailer of Shawshank Redemption. It just needs to be shown. But just before I do, let me just get to the comments very quickly. See here, Anthony says many black and white movies. Yeah, black and white movies that this jail is in. Yeah. I heard. I've never seen Tango and Cash, but I'm sure it's a great film. I'm sure you're talking about Shawshank or Tango and Cash, Diane. I'm not entirely sure. Rachel, I promise you, OSR is definitely, even if you don't get to have the chance to investigate, it's a location that doesn't disappoint. So let me stop the screen for just a quick second, and let me get the link ready. So give me just a second here. Okay, now to go through this fun stuff, and then as soon after that, I mean, I only got about now. I only have about 15 minutes left before the next show starts. Not only just on the Pack channel, but there is now actually a show on Things Network that starts right after me. So once it hits 6 o'clock, I do have to end this. So we're gonna try to. I'll show the trailer, and then we'll see how much more we can try to get to the slideshow. But I will have to end this once it hits 6 o'clock sharp. So that means already that I think we could all agree there's definitely going to be a part 2 on this. So I just want to make sure while I'm doing this that you guys can see the trailer. All right, bear with me for just a moment. Okay, here we go. Hopefully. You guys can't hear it? I just got a message here. Hold on one second, guys. Okay. See, I don't know what's going on with StreamYard, but something's been acting weird. Hang on. I got another way to present it. Now, let's try this instead. All right. See, that's what I was kind of worried about. Let's try this way. Because I know I just did it. I just tried clicking on a different way of the. I just figured there was another way how you could do this, and apparently the sound will work, but just give it a hope for the best. So tell me if you guys could hear it this time.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard all the evidence. I submit that this was not a hot-blooded crime of passion. Consider this. A revolver holds 6 bullets.
Here we go.
Not 8. That means that he fired the gun empty and then stopped to reload.
By the power vested in me by the state of Maine, I hereby order you to serve 2 life sentences back to back, 1 for each of your victims. So be it.
Send you here for life? That's exactly what they take.
I believe in 2 things. Discipline.
Help me down!
And the Bible. Here you'll receive both.
Andy came to Shawshank Prison in 1947. Why'd you do it?
I didn't, since you asked.
You can fit right in. I must admit, I didn't think much of Andy the first time I laid eyes on him. He had a quiet way about him. A walk and a talk that just wasn't normal around here.
There are places in the world that aren't made out of stone. There's something inside that they can't touch.
What are you talking about?
Hope.
Let me tell you something, my friend. Hope is a dangerous thing.
Damn it, Dufresne, you're putting me behind.
Hope can drive a man insane.
You better be sick or dead in there, I kid you not.
You better get used to that idea. Oh, my holy God.
I guess it comes down to a simple choice, really. Too busy living. You get busy dying.
Get busy living. Or get busy dying. That's damn right.
Classic movie. Always a classic to watch. Good thing I ended it right on time. So, yeah, sorry about that, guys. I don't know what's going on with StreamYard. there's just something bizarre going on with the sound. So I think from this point on, anytime I show any movie trailers or anything like that associated with it, I'm just going to have to do it this way, because it's the way we used to do it. It just doesn't seem like the sound is working. So good thing there is a backup here on StreamYard. So I got only about 10 minutes left. So let's get right back to the slideshow. So give me 1 second here. Okay, so now we covered all this. We're going to go right. But of course, now understandably, Shawshank Redemption was not the only, now almost 30 years later, Shawshank Redemption has not been the only film, along with the two other films that have been shot, because many other films, along with music videos, have followed. Now I'm not necessarily counting the paranormal shows, because almost every paranormal show you could think of has been at OSR. So we're going to kind of more focus on the movies and music videos that have been filmed there after Shawshank. But right before we do, yeah, this is what I was actually going to mention before. This is actually what I mentioned previously. After closing, most of the grounds and support buildings, including the outer wall, have been demolished since the closing. It sat empty for several years until local activists rallied to purchase the building from the state for $1 and committed to repairing and restoring this historic structure. In 1995, the Mansfield Reformatory Preservation Society was formed. They have turned the prison into a museum and conduct tours to help fund grounds rehabilitation projects, and currently work to stabilize the buildings against further deterioration. The East Cell Block, get this, remains the largest freestanding steel cell block in the world at 6 tiers high. So truly a record. And of course, obviously, I'm sure a lot of us have seen it before, but this is, of course, what it looks like today, which I will be seeing again in just a few days. Now, going back, here's where I think where we got a lot of the other movies and television shows. So for those of you that don't know, starting a few years after Shawshank was filmed, in 1997, the prison was used for scenes of a Russian prison for General Ivan Radek in the movie Air Force One. In 2000, Godsmack filmed their music video of Awake at the Prison. In 2004, Lil Wayne featured this prison in his video for the song Go DJ. In April 2006, the horror thriller motion picture Fallen Angels was filmed almost entirely at OSR. It is also the filming place for the music video of the song Relentless Chaos by Miss May I, a metalcore band from Troy. I believe that was filmed around that same period, 2006. Then in the Purple Smoke Project, a hip-hop group, filmed a video for the song Calm Down at the Prison in 2011. Also that same year, Attack Attack, another metalcore band from Westerville, shot a portion of their video Smokeahonis at the prison. In 2012, Anti-Flag shot the majority of their video for This Is the New Sound in the Prison. In 2017, David Allan Coe and the Moonshine Bandits recorded a music video at OSR for Take This Job and Shove It. That same year, new metal act Motor Grader also filmed a video at OSR for the song Dorian. Now, half of these bands that I'm hearing, I've never even heard of before. And I'm actually a pretty hardcore metal fan. So it's kind of funny. I don't even know half of these bands or never even heard any of their music before. In the fall of 2018, Escape Plan, I guess the poster didn't show up. Escape Plan, The Extractors with Sylvester Stallone was filmed at the facility. In April 2019, the facility was used to film country music artist Eric Church's Some of It music video. On November 25th and 26th of that same year, filming for Judas and the Messiah took place at the Reformatory. Where are all the posters that were supposed to show up? I guess I must have missed some. And then just most recently, between May and June of 2022, Shelby Oaks filmed scenes at this location, which Shelby Oaks It is an upcoming horror film that is going to be coming out sometime in 2023. And just out of curiosity, just before we ended, I'm actually going to see if I could find because I still have the YouTube link right here. So let's see if we could find if it's even out yet. That is, no, I don't think there is. They said it was supposed to come out sometime this year, but there's not even a trailer out. So even trying to show the most recent movie that has been filmed there, unfortunately, it's not available as of right now. Going quickly to the comments, Josh, you never seen Shawshank Redemption, but at the same time, I'll give kudos for you. Good thing you're watching it now. Always best to watch a film like this, especially if you've not been to this location yet. I think we have time for just one final slide just before I have to end this. So, forgot to add we're actually ending on a perfect note right here because we talked about the majority of the history of Mansfield. So very quickly, as far as how it is today, the Reformatory houses the official State Corrections History Museum. Is a popular site for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts, hosts numerous special events, and as of 2018, welcomes more than 120,000 visitors per year. All right, so we're gonna have to end it right here because again I gotta end this in about 3 minutes, but we definitely ended perfectly on this note. So definitely good timing for it. As a result of this, we'll definitely pick up from this next week. I don't know about you guys, but I think this has definitely become one of my favorite. I think this has become one of my favorite slideshows that I've ever presented, and it was a lot of work putting this one together. I'm not gonna lie. This one, to be honest with you guys, I literally was working on this all the way up till about probably close to about 4 o'clock in the morning last night. I mean, I was determined to get this slideshow completed before I headed out to OSR myself for ParasiteCon. So I definitely got, even though I didn't get as much sleep, I definitely got my hours worth putting this together. And again, being one of my since I said that this was one of my most favorite ones I think I've done, if they're planning on having ParasiteCon again next year and the following years, this might actually be a slideshow I might even consider creating as an annual slideshow, because I don't know what it is. OSR is just a location I just love so much. And but I just want to say very quickly for everyone who's tuned in, I had a really great audience tonight. I mean, it's definitely been a lot larger than the average I would normally have on these shows. And it's just I just gotta say, thank you guys so much as always. Very quickly, just to the comments one final time before we end it. Very much appreciated, Josh. Thank you, Eric. Glad you guys really enjoyed it. And of course, like I said, so not only, and it's not over yet, understandably. We'll talk about that, Eric. Oops, damn it, I keep dropping my phone, damn it. Considering that we're not quite, considering that we had to stop here kind of in the middle, but on a good note, as you guys can very much imagine, we're not done with this yet. We talked about the history side of OSR, understandably, as no surprise to you guys whatsoever. We're going to get right down to the paranormal side. And I got a couple videos that I'm going to be showing, including, for the first time ever, one of my own paranormal investigation videos at OSR. In spite of all the times that I've gone there, I've only actually been able to investigate OSR once. Now, for any of you guys, anyone who is going to ParasiteCon this weekend, there actually is a paranormal investigation that is going to be happening in OSR. Unfortunately, however, this is one of those celebrity paranormal investigations. So guess what? That usually means the prices for the investigation are far more expensive than the average paranormal investigation, than your own personal one, if you will. But either way, Tom and I are going to be there. We're going to be super excited. We're excited to see everybody who's going to be there. Mike Ricksecker, Brian J. Cano, the Ghost Brothers, Dave Schrader, Kindred Spirits is going to be there. Andrea Perron is going to be there. Aaron Sagers from Paranormal Con on Camera is going to be there. It's going to be a really great time. We're leaving Friday morning, and we should get to Ohio. It's only about a 6.5 hour drive for us to get from Chicago to Mansfield. It might be a little bit longer because we are leaving a day early, and we're going to take our time. But we should be there by Friday afternoon. It's going to be really exciting. Can't wait to see everybody there. And I just want to say thank you guys all so much, as always, for tuning in. Again, in the end, I always do this for you guys. Seriously, I seriously can't thank you guys enough. So, okay. So therefore, I know I will see some of you guys tomorrow afternoon for the not Frighteners, to the grave and back with me, Lois, and Rosie. Tomorrow night, we got Supernatural Talk, in which for the first time ever, we're finally having Chicago Haunts writer Ursula Bielski on, which I am super excited to have on because she's been someone that a lot of these shows have been trying to get her on as a guest now for the last couple of years. And finally, for Frighteners, I know they're going to be running, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to. It depends on the connection. I don't know if I'll be able to be on full time because understandably I'll still be on the road. So it all depends on the internet connection wise. But either way, I know I'll see some of you guys tomorrow afternoon and evening for Supernatural Talk. Thank you guys all. Thank you all again so much for tuning in. I'll see some of you guys again. Once again, I'll see some of you guys tomorrow afternoon, well, I'll just say tomorrow. But if not, I will see some of you guys next week. You guys all have a great night.